I'm joined by author Laura Southall, who has written a terrific little book, and I did read it, Rental Properties for Canadian Women. It's, first of all, anybody can own a rental property. Why did you gear it to women?
Well, I have felt like women are looking for advice. Women are searching for answers about finance in general, and they're looking for ways to sort of ground their families in financial stability. And they know that rental properties are one of those options. So they were seeking me out. I was doing seminars. I felt like so many women were asking me questions. And when you look at the books that are available about rental properties, it's mainly men writing those books. And I thought, I've had all this experience. I bought my first property 23 years ago, and I thought if I could just put all the lessons that I've learned in one book, I could say, here's what you need to know, and here's sort of a roadmap, and learn from my mistakes and go forward. So I was not expecting the response that the book has had. It's been very popular, and that's been great. And obviously there's even a bigger demand than I anticipated. So
that is great news. And the other thing, I just want to get this in, that half your profits are going to
Girls Inc. That's right.
Yeah.
So I'm so pleased to partner with them. Their programs are amazing, especially the Smart Start program. So their mission statement is to inspire girls to be strong, smart, and bold. And the book is in line with that. So half of all the profits of every book ordered is going to Girls Inc.
That is such good news, and they are a great organization. I also have a high regard for them. So I had a fourplex and a sixplex myself, and in a different city, and I sold them about 15 years ago when I moved to Kingston.
Right.
And I enjoyed the process. I would do it again. I quite enjoyed it, but I found that a lot of friends would come to me after, they say, well, it's worked out so well for you, I've decided to do this too. Mm-hmm. Male, female, couples, whatever. And I found myself kind of wincing and saying, oh, you may want to really think about that.
Yeah, there's work involved.
There is a lot of work involved. And there's also, it takes a certain temperament, a certain kind of person. Can you get into that a little bit? What kind of person should not be looking at doing this?
Certainly, and I think there's a section in the book, and it's the whys you should get into real estate, and then there's the why not. And I feel like if you're a person who's going to get stressed out every time a tenant calls you and worry about things like vacancy, then rental properties are not for you. Some people say to me, I can't own a rental property because I'm not handy. I disagree completely. Yeah. You do too. Okay. Yeah. So you can hire help, you can hire a plumber, you can hire an electrician, but if you're going to stay up all night worrying about your tenants or about a phone call or something like that, it's not the right investment for you. And truly, I don't think it's the right investment for lots of people, but I mean, it is a lucrative investment. And when I look at my net worth today, I couldn't have saved at the rate that my real estate created for me. So it is a good financial stepping stone for lots of people, women and men, really.
And as far as being handy,
Yes.
Think of it as your property. This is your investment. So you're not handy, but don't ignore things. Stay on top of things, or you're going to find it. You know, they say a stitch in nine saves, or stitch in time saves nine. True, because it's going to become a really big problem and
big headache.
One of the things that we always did, or I always did, was get an electrician to come in, or even a handyman. They don't have to be an electrician, I don't think.
No.
Just to change the outlets.
Oh.
Because if somebody has plugged in a fridge and that outlet gives out, and all the food in the fridge goes bad,
Yeah.
And maybe even the fridge needs to be replaced, you have cost yourself a lot of money. And to get somebody in and just change them all over before an apartment changed over, it was those little things that I did that I found made a really big difference.
I always felt it was helpful to go in between tenants and just refresh, clean, fix all the little things. And you're doing two things really. You're maintaining your investment, but then you're also attracting a better quality tenant when you start to do showings, right?
I can't agree more. Absolutely. And I was surprised sometimes because mine were pristine. I do say so myself. If a counter had a burn mark in it, it got replaced. Carpeting got replaced if it needed. I wanted them to be perfect when somebody moved in.
Right.
And sometimes people would walk in and they'd say, oh, well, it's much nicer than I expected. And then they'd leave. And I'd think, and I started to realize that some people just don't think that they deserve to live in a nice place. I don't know. It was, the price was right. I was not gouging anybody. I just found it curious.
Maybe they were worried they were going to damage it.
I don't know. I found that really interesting. But then I learned a lot of things along the way too, as you probably did. What would you say is the greatest lesson that you learned? The thing that you'd say the number one thing you've got to be really comfortable with or understand is?
I would say that you have to keep the long-term goal in mind, because you're going to have ups and downs with tenants. And if you don't keep the long-term goal of why did I buy this rental property in mind when you're going through those ups and downs, then you're going to get frustrated and end up selling early and get out of the game. And really, rental properties, I've done everything. I've flipped properties too, but I think buying rental properties and holding them for the long term is the best way for success, really.
And I, again, absolutely agree. One of the things I felt was, before you even call a real estate agent, is read the Tenant Landlord Act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important to understand that. And it's different in every province, but it's pretty thorough and it lays out everything for you. So if you're familiar with that before you even start the process, then you know what's allowed.
Yeah. And just because you don't agree with it, and this was something I found one of my friends did, just because you don't agree with what's in it doesn't mean you get to ignore it.
No, that's very true.
And if you really want to have some entertainment, go to the tribunal. Just sit at the back and listen to the cases in a tribunal. That was really great education.
I feel like I've been pretty lucky. Like, I've had a couple of tenants who haven't paid their rent over 23 years where I've had to go through the process of evicting them. But 2 in 23 years and owning a lot of properties. And I feel like generally most people just want to pay their rent. They're not out to not pay. So overall, I feel like my experience has been pretty good.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too. I had wonderful tenants, and they were wonderful when I sold. They made it so easy for showing their apartments, and they really were terrific. And again, I would do it again. I absolutely would. So if somebody is looking, what is your best advice? What kind of property should someone start with?
Oh, that's a great question. And one I get asked all the time. So my first property was a 3-bedroom bungalow on Kings Court in Kingston. And I truly believe that a bungalow style with a basement apartment is the best first property, whether you're buying it as your first house and going to move up from there, or whether you're just looking for a rental property. Because the bungalow has a bigger footprint, it makes the basement apartment bigger. So you can charge more. There's 2 units, and so you're going to have 2 rents coming in, or you're living in the main floor and renting out the basement. And in my case, when I bought that first house, I rented out the basement for enough to cover the mortgage payment, which was fantastic, right? I was only 23. The rent coming in for the basement apartment was paying my mortgage, and I was able to save the down payment for the next house. So I always say a bungalow with a basement apartment for your first property.
And right now, it's been, 4 or 5 years since secondary units became reality in Kingston. So a lot of people have basement apartments in their bungalow.
Yeah, and they've been, the city has been very helpful in terms of lessening, because we've had such a vacancy rate. They're trying to lessen all the regulations around it. So really, you're just applying now to allow a secondary unit. It's much easier than it used to be.
That is important too. There are some things that a basement apartment has to have.
Yes.
And what are some of those things?
Oh goodness, it's been a long time since I've gone to get a basement apartment legalized, but I know that they have to have a separate entrance, and then they have to have windows in the bedroom. There needs to be fire doors and fire drywall. You would want to check the city regulations for everything, but they'll actually walk through and tell you what to do, what you need to do to make your apartment legal.
That is really good news.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's anywhere in the city, but almost. There's only a couple of little pockets where, and it's because of sewer and water restrictions, I think.
So too, yeah. I know there are a few pockets where you can't, but most of the city, they've opened it up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're allowed to increase your rent, but not the way you think you can.
That's
Can
right.
you go through that?
Sure. So people always think they can just unilaterally increase the rent, but you can't do that. You're allowed to increase the rent once a year. You have to give your tenant 90 days notice, but it's only by the rent increase allowed in Ontario. So I think this year it was 1.8 or 2%. Each year they announce a new amount. So you have to give your tenants 90 days notice and say, this is how much legally I am allowed to increase your rent, and then you can increase it, which doesn't amount to much. If you're thinking that your tenant is paying $1,000 for the basement apartment, you maybe can increase it by $20. But if the tenant moves out, you are allowed to increase the rent to anything that is fair market value. So if your tenant was paying $1,000, she moves out, you put it on the market for $1,200 and it gets rented, then it's rented at $1,200. And then going from there, you have to wait 12 months, then give them the 90 days notice and you can increase the rent.
Okay. So it's not just anything at any time.
No, but if your unit goes vacant, you can set the new rent.
Okay, good to know. Now tell me about, you can't ask for a security deposit.
No,
or a cleaning deposit like they can in some states and so on.
No.
But you do get first and last month's rent.
That's right.
Now you've got the use of their last month's rent. So
you're supposed to pay them interest,
right.
Which is, most people don't know that. But by law, you pay them interest on that last month's deposit. And sometimes we have tenants that have been in for 20 years. So we've been holding that last month's rent for 20 years. You need to pay interest on that. And there's a formula in the Landlord-Tenant Act that tells you what you're supposed to be paying. But the tenant needs to ask for that when they move out. So it's the tenant that needs to ask the landlord for that.
Okay, I used to pay it every year.
Oh.
And what I discovered when I bought the buildings that they hadn't paid, and it was an adjustment.
Yeah.
And it came as a great shock to the person selling me the building that they suddenly had all this had accumulated over, in one case, 20 years.
Yes.
It's a lot of money.
Well, sometimes a tenant stays for 20 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you can't increase the rent with the fair market value, when you're just sticking to the rent control increases, sometimes that tenant's not paying very much rent, so they're never going to move.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, there is so much in this little book. It is, it is really, it's a start. But I think also talk to people who know what they're doing, like you.
Yeah.
And so where can they buy these books?
So it's on Amazon, and really, if you just search my name on Amazon, you can order either the paperback or the ebook.
And can they get them anywhere else?
Not right now. No,
Okay.
it's just on Amazon for right now.
And the cost is?
$14.99.
That is so reasonable.
And half the profits are going to Girls Inc. from that.
Which is a wonderful organization, and I encourage everybody to look them up and see what they can do to help them. This has been so interesting, and it's so nice talking to someone else who understands.
And I'm so glad that you owned a 4-plex and a 6-plex, because it makes the conversation so much better too.
It was interesting. One day I'll tell you about the time the tactical unit showed up, but that's a whole other story.
How long did you own them for?
6-7 years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
long enough to have the experience.
Yeah, and then when I moved and sold them for more than the asking price.
Oh, nice.
Yes, so it worked out for me on a whole bunch of levels, and the rent had paid the mortgage plus over all those years. It was great. Yeah,
Well,
I highly recommend it.
Well, that's the thing about rental properties, right? You're only putting down a down payment, and then your property is appreciating based on the value of the whole building. Right. And then the tenants are paying back the mortgage. Yeah. So for a small amount of investment, really, you're getting appreciation on a bigger number. and then the tenants are paying back your loan. It's, I don't know, to me it just has made sense from the beginning.
It did for me too.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then I leveraged one to buy another. It was, yeah.
That's exactly. It's like you've already read the book.
I did, but it just brought back a whole lot of good memories. So thanks so much for being with us today, and good luck with the sale of your book.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.